Boys and girls, it is 1:30. Welcome to the House Committee on Education. This will be our last meeting of the year, and we're going to jump right on in. I know it said on the agenda we were going to do two bills, House Bill 2427 and House Bill 2458. We are not going to work 2458. We're going to do 2427 and then be done for the rest of the year, and then you don't have to hear me talk unless it's on the House floor. So, Jason, thank you. I apologize for some of the confusion today and the work that I may or may not have put you through, but I apologize for that, but I really appreciate you. Just wanted to get that out there. With that, committee, we're going to work Senate Bill 2427, and I'm just going to go ahead and open it up for discussion. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we table this bill. We didn't have complete information yesterday. I feel like we need a lot more background before we can make a decision on this. We don't even know what policies schools have in place. So I think we should set it aside and do our due diligence to figure out what's going on.
There's a motion. It was seconded by Stogsdill. So I'm going to go with that. Yes vote tables it, and no vote, we debate it. All those in favor of tabling House Bill 2427 say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Opinion of the chairs, the noes have it. Division has been called. Those in favor of tabling, raise your right hand. Those opposed to tabling the bill? Okay, 11-5, the motion fails. We are back on the bill. Representative Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we need a motion on the bill before I bring an amendment?
No.
Okay, I have an amendment for the bill.
Very good. Would you care to explain your amendment, sir?
Yes, I will. This amendment, I've had problems with us using the term biological to define sex, and I have a problem with the microphone too. Let's get two of them going here. I've had a problem using biological as a determinant for sex, and when I think what we really want to know is the genetic sex, and this bill, or this amendment, changes that, and it also defines what genetic sex is. And along with putting genetic in there, I also included the expression thereof, because it is that solves some of the issues when we get into what are quote-unquote intersex issues. So that kind of cleans it up. I think it's a much cleaner and straighter approach.
Okay.
And I guess I would move the amendment.
Good. Do I have a second? Representative Riley. Discussion. Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How are you going to, are you going to require a chromosome test for all kids in our schools?
Okay. There's no requirement for a chromosome test in this amendment.
Okay, well then how, this is for an individual with at least one Y chromosome, how are you going to identify those people?
And that's part of the reason the term expression is in there, because if the Y chromosome is expressed, it will be an obvious physical characteristic, but it could be tested. If somebody wished to test it, if they wanted to prove what their chromosomes were, it's an easy test, it's a simple test, but there's no requirement for it here.
But if you have, say, a parent that says, well, I don't want my daughter sleeping with this person over there because they identify with a certain gender, are you going to require that person who they are objecting to get a chromosome test?
If they desire to prove what gender they are, I guess they could.
So we would have to require them to have an invasive medical procedure to satisfy a parent's possible objection to this person.
The invasiveness of this measure is equivalent to blowing your nose.
Well, it's still, well, anyway, thank you.
Representative Featherston.
I know needles aren't a big deal to a lot of people, but I have definitely seen kids pass out in the nurse's office over even having a splinter pulled, and said kid then hit his head on the way, hit his head on the way down, then we have a bigger. So I think although a lot of us are probably comfortable with needles, not me, I think we need to acknowledge that it is an invasive procedure, I think, by medical definition.
Representative Sanders and Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some issues with this in the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, which has already passed out of both this committee and on the House floor. The term biological sex was used. I'm not certain that I see that there's any advantage for the purposes of this bill from changing biological sex to generic sex. It worked in the Fairness in Women's Sports bill. I don't see why it shouldn't work for this.
Representative Stogsdill.
Add another quick question. Who would pay for this test? Would it be the person that, the parent that has the concern about the other child, or would it be the child would have to pay for a chromosome test, and how much are those? Where do they have to get them done? I don't know.
Is the test required? I don't see it in the bill that the test is required, or in the amendment.
I've said it a couple times, so I can repeat it again. There's no test required in this bill.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to, I guess, state this for the record. I truly appreciate my colleague, as an academic, my colleague's attempt to make this a little bit more binary of an amendment, because the definition of biological sex has always been troublesome to me before it wasn't ever academically supported. I'm unable to support the amendment because I believe the bill is bad for all Kansans, but I just wanted to state that knowing your background, the efforts that you made, I truly appreciate.
Further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I will look for a second. Representative Riley. Seeing no more discussion, those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Opinion of the chair is the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment passes. We're back on the bill. Further discussion on the bill. Representative Younger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, yesterday's testimony was really troubling to me when you hear the situation that this young person was put in. And it is. It's troubling. So I made a phone call yesterday to the school superintendent because it bothers me when I hear that you know, no action has been taken. Parents have tried to reach out, the superintendent refusing to communicate with them, and again, that bothers me. I've been in enough of those situations, though, to also realize that that's one side of the story, and you need to check on the other side also. So that's why I made the phone call, and I talked to Mr. Meckel, and we had a good conversation, and he told me, he said, Dave, we had communication with the mother immediately after that. You know, it was a good conversation. She was never angry. She was, you know, disappointed that this happened, but they had a good conversation. The board has taken steps to change their procedure so that this doesn't happen again. And, you know, I really stood my ground with local control. I was in the business for 36 years, and I felt obligated to look out for all students, and all students is all students. I don't want anybody to be harmed. There was a mistake made, and the district has taken steps to correct that so that it doesn't happen again. And so I wanted to share that so that everybody, you know, knew that there was also another side of the story. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure, I appreciate that. I'd be curious to see what those policy changes were. Do we have a copy of those or an idea of what?
Mr. Chair, I did not ask for a copy of that, but the superintendent encouraged, he said, if you, And I asked him, I said, may I share this with, he said, by all means. He said, if anybody has questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to the committee on this. But I did not ask for a copy of that information.
Very good. Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Representative Younger, you're reaching out to them. I think that was a real positive thing to do. Can you verify, was this an actual school-sponsored event that the school was opening up to kids, or was this an out-of-school event that was offered by parents and so on, with perhaps some teachers as going along as sponsors?
Mr. Chair. You know, and I struggled with that, again, because I was a high school principal, a superintendent that we offer these kinds of trips. Mm-hmm. And I always made it very clear, this is not a school-sponsored activity. The communication to the students, the recruitment of the students, if you would, should happen after hours. We're not putting posters in the building. We are not communicating via school email. We're not having meetings at the school. The board never approved those overseas trips, those kinds of trips. But unfortunately, that didn't happen in this case. And I shared that with Mr. Meckel. I said, you know, again, in my opinion, it's a school trip because the board voted on it. The teacher communicated via the school email. As I understand, they had meetings at the school. So I regret to inform, but I wouldn't have done my, you know, I need to share that with you also.
Yeah, it just bothered me yesterday when they said the young girl had to raise her own money for the trip. And so obviously, did the school or the school district put any money in toward that trip?
If I may clarify, this was one of the groups, the national tour group, so it wasn't a school trip in the terms that the school had no financial responsibility, but you know, my interpretation, because the school did all those things during the day and the board approved it, it was. But it was one of those companies that are really a for-profit company.
Yeah.
That you go out, kids fundraise, and they have to raise the money for the trip.
Well, thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yesterday, I also was troubled by the testimony. We heard one side, and it was strictly hearsay because none of the parties that spoke yesterday were actually involved in the situation. So we're asked to pass policy on hearsay. We didn't hear the little girl, that I'll call little girl, who slept with the other child, their side of the story. And, you know, there's two sides, and as the previous representatives said, we failed to hear both sides, but yet we're expected to react. And based on some of the conversations around the table yesterday, it's very troubling for me to go home last night, and I usually don't take things home with me when I go, but I did yesterday because I saw a lot of times with my children growing up, little Latino kids in white schools and playing in sports, some of the same situations that parents and kids had problems being around them and growing up that same way. So I'll be a strong no on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that one of the proponents for this yesterday picked up the student in question at the airport and gave testimony that the girl was very upset, that there was a marked change in her personality. So I believe that, yes, we did hear from somebody who was directly involved.
Representative Schmoy.
Aside from the bill addressing that boys house with boys and girls house with girls, does this in any way direct local control to do housing any other specific way? Basically, does it dictate that everybody needs to have their own individual room and that the school can't, at that point, really just work amongst themselves to figure out housing aside from just the common sense of you put boys with boys and girls with girls?
The bill talks about overnight accommodations being provided. So the school district can absolutely handle that at the local level. So we're not telling the school district, you can't make accommodations. We're not telling the school district, it says right there in plain language, they've got to adopt a policy. So it still leaves it up to the district to adopt the policy.
So if we had a student that didn't feel comfortable housing with those of their Y chromosome counterparts, then that particular school district can choose to put that kid by themselves or with people who have expressed that they are comfortable with it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just some points of clarification. Is this bill only specific to public school districts and not private schools?
Yes, the bill only is directing boards of education of school districts to adopt such policy.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's only, once again, just targeting public schools and not the quite successful private schools and non-public school programs as well. I will be voting no against this because I do believe this is unconstitutional. I believe that the Attorney General's office has stated that. I think that when you emphasize the word individual into any definition, whether it's genetics or biological, that you're now forcing someone to make a choice, whether they need to have now a DNA test. This is something that we should not take lightly. We should not do it based upon just limited proponent testimonies. We should have feedback across the state, for this is going to impact every public school. I also don't feel like this actually accomplished what it attempts to accomplish. If a transgender male, who I believe is a male, has to identify themselves so they can sleep in a room and they have to identify their chromosomes, then that is just stating that, well, if you were assigned female at birth, it's easier for you to just sleep with females in that room, but yet they identify themselves as a transgender male. And that subject was not addressed because we were focusing only on transgender females, as related to the emphasis that we put on sexual assault yesterday as well. Finally, I just feel that the committee continues to just make decisions that only impact selective areas of the state that benefits their constituents and not of the entire state. Case in point, we have not worked a due process bill, which was brought up. That could benefit the entire state, but yet we spend time, once again, to talk about selective interest groups, and that will only benefit, in this case, well, it would only discriminate against this individual and public schools. So I hope that you vote against this based on those reasons.
Thank you. Further discussion. Representative Featherston.
I think I'll just input that I've been on some of these high school trips because, you know, the piano teacher's always available to go, and the music teacher will always ask the piano teacher to join. And I'll say on one of those trips, I was in fact asked if it would be okay if I was assigned to share a bed with my own child. This is so far out of the norm to have kids, especially high school, sharing a bed, that it's so far out of the norm that the teacher, who I consider a friend, asked, would that be okay? And she knew darn well the answer would be yes. I would also like to again say what happened on this trip to that child was gross negligence from the teacher. I think it was gross negligence from the parent. I can't even imagine any group of girls preparing to go overseas for any amount of time that they wouldn't want to know who their roommates were, because you've got to discuss who's going to buy the charger. Like if some of the people in the room were of greater means or less means, not everybody can afford that expensive charger so you don't melt your hairdryer. So somebody's got to discuss who's bringing the hairdryer, who's bringing the curling iron. I don't know if we use those anymore. The liquids. I know who's going to like bring the lotion for Adam's hair. I don't know what boys discuss, okay? I only have girls, but like that any of this occurred was way outside the norm, way outside the norm. And when I checked in with my choir teacher friends in my very brief survey, the standard, and these teachers have dealt with these situations, the standard was that every person involved in any way, shape, or form would have to be comfortable with the arrangement. And I just have a hard time believing there aren't parents today. I think parents are excellent advocates for their children and for their concerns. Even like my standards would be different than my children's standards regarding dress in high school. But I would probably be the first person to say, like, no, my children aren't going to wear that costume. It is not acceptable to me. It's too racy for me. And so the fact that we couldn't do that with the housing of our children, which I assume if we went overseas, we were there for several days, a week, to make it worth it. I just think this is so far out of the norm that we're making sweeping changes that are going to require kids to submit their DNA of sorts to government. That's a whole different issue, but I think this can be resolved. And again, I would like just to clarify, I think it was horrible that a child was made to feel badly, scared, however that child felt. This was a terrible incident. I'm so glad to hear they have remedied the situation.
Well, we don't know how because we don't have that information, but we can get that for sure. But reminder, this is not a requirement. And then the school district can still adopt policies, just for the record, as we already discussed. Representative Stogsdill.
Mr. Chair, here we are making state legislation off of a single incident. And to me, this is a total example of where local control ought to take over. That with the slightest bit of common sense, a school board should be able to deal with this issue. We don't need state legislation, which really, in my opinion, should deal with something that's systemic, that is a problem across the state, that sort of thing, that is based on those kinds of incidents and facts and so on. But here we are taking a single incident and making it an issue within the Kansas House of Representatives. And again, we talk about local control. Let's let the school boards deal with this. And if it becomes a wide problem, then yes, maybe bring it to the legislature. But it certainly has not achieved that level at this point. And I would encourage everyone to vote no on this legislation. Thank you.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many times should we allow this to happen before we do take action? That's an open-ended question for anybody, but also the Board of Education of each school district shall adopt a policy. This is local control. We're just encouraging them to step up their game, protect our children. Let's don't allow this thing to ever happen again. I think every father in this room would be a little puffed up if they found out that their daughter was forced to sleep with a male. I know I would. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Estes. Okay, Representative Haskins, my apologies.
I understand that there's local control still embedded in this, and I think that that is respectful in itself. But in respect to my colleague, once again, this is by the reference of a father and upset with the daughter, it now brings in to the question of just stating that this is a daughter-only issue, but yet there are assigned females at birth that identify themselves as a male, and this individually and overall with the public state is going to be deemed unconstitutional. Our own Attorney General has said that. And so, yes, in answering your question, one is way too much. And I do support my colleague in saying that how this was handled was atrocious and bad teaching, bad administration. But we're spending an entire day talking about this issue, and we have not brought up anything related to special ed funding. We have not talked about anything for due process. We're deciding to spend our last day talking about something that we don't have enough information, and even the chair has said, I would like to see more information. So folks, if we're not going to table it, then it's a bad bill. Got to vote it down. Let's do a better job.
Just want to point out for the record, the House has already passed special ed funding. We're not a budget committee. Representative Schmoy.
I do appreciate the fact that it was brought up that we are talking about girls. I'm the mom of boys. I have 3 boys, and I have had to have hard conversations with them over the years of perception and making sure that they have someone else with them in different situations and circumstances just to live above reproach. And having boys, I would be just as upset with the school if they would have put one of my boys in a room with girls. Because at that point, that leaves things to question, and it would make girls uncomfortable. It would make my boys uncomfortable, because it is just common sense that we house boys with boys and girls with girls. And I don't understand why that is such a difficult concept. And I hate the fact that we're having to have this conversation in this building, in this room. It is horrifying that we have kids, and you know full well that it's not just one kid that has ever been made uncomfortable in a situation like this. That's not the way the world works. But the fact that we have kids who are uncomfortable, whose their emotions, the damage to them is not being considered because we are hyper focused on the emotions of others, is really disturbing. And the fact that this would have been just as damaging to any of my boys as it was to this girl is, I mean, let's call it what it is. This is not an overstep. This still continues local control. All this is saying, in order to keep things above board and above reproach and keep our kids safe and not be questioned on things, this is really common sense.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your colleagues. Just a couple questions in this, and I'll defer to my colleague on genetic sex. Can ethnicity be determined based upon DNA codes? Can regionalization be determined by DNA? Yeah, you're the only one. Yeah.
You said regionalization?
Yeah, like where they grew up at.
Oh, well, actually, there's probably pretty good evidence that there are regional differences in populations that haven't been involved with a lot of migration. But that's certainly not contained. And actually, the term DNA is not included in this bill, or this amendment that is now part of the bill.
So how would they identify their chromosomes?
Chromosomes do not have to be DNA tested. There's actually microscopic evaluation of chromosomes as well. So I'm famous for getting wonderful feedback in this room. But so, yeah, DNA is probably the easiest thing to do, but it can also be done microscopically.
That's just overall, that's my point. DNA is the code of how we become human, who we are. If we collect DNA on one thing just to identify the biological sex, what's going to stop us from collecting information on ethnicity? Next thing you know, we'll have issues dealing with that a black child should not be sleeping with a white child. And this just sets us back. Folks, this is not something that is just, I wish it was a decision that we could all be together and say it's common sense, but it's not. The complexity of this, and even if I failed my biology and my assessment of the DNA, the point is that we are collecting information or forcing individuals to provide information for them to live their particular lifestyle. And that is something that has been a long history of wars and abuse, and something that we just don't take lightly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a little bit of a clarification. My concern on this subject all along has been the accuracy of the terminology, and I understand some people get a little bit dicey with genetic instead of biological, but I can assure you that a chromosome evaluation for the Y and the X chromosome will not determine what someone's race or ethnicity is.
Representative Estes.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, as long as we were having the conversation about male and female, Section 1, line 8 uses the word each genetic sex. So I think I can't speak for other people's motivations, but I am equally concerned about boys being comfortable and who sleeps in their room and girls being comfortable with who sleeps in their room. We now know that this has happened. If it happens once, it can happen again, and I think it is wise of us to be proactive to prevent this from happening. Thank you.
Representative Schreiber, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hate to keep prolonging this, but when I look at the definitions, I really appreciate the representative's amendment here, because I'm a biology major too, and it's much more exact than the one that was in the bill, which included chromosomes, which could include physical examinations, which also refers to whether, how a gender is expressed. So I think this definition is much more concrete in my mind than the previous one. So I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
Good. Further discussion? Representative Silas Miller. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a quick question for possibly reviser or legislative research. I was wondering if there was any current law or statute establishing a firm definition of gender or biological sex in the Kansas Constitution at all.
Mr. Chairman, members committee, we could do more research, but to my knowledge, I don't know of a clear definition of gender or biological sex currently under the statutes. Otherwise, that probably would have been referred to when the bill was drafted.
Excellent. And so I guess, if I may, so I believe that that would mean that if this does get passed, that it would be a precedent set by the first official definition of quote-unquote biological sex or genetic sex in the Kansas Constitution. And it is my opinion that that is a dangerous road to go down, because I think most people who are watching this today and paying attention to this know where this is really actually going. So I will be voting no on this.
Well, this is not a constitutional amendment, for the record. Okay. Very good. Further comments or questions? Representative Chamoy.
Wow, I'm doing a lot of talking today. Now, just to clarify, we're talking about schools. We're talking about students in these schools. We're talking about schools that know their students and have been around them, and the idea that we're throwing around that they're going to have to get this testing and that testing. Most of these schools have an idea of who their students are, and they have an idea of who that family is, and they have a basic knowledge of this is the situation that we're going into, and we're taking this group of kids, and this is the breakdown of this group of kids. We're not talking about we're rounding up 100 people that we've never met before and trying to figure out who's going to room with who. Again, this is literal common sense, and I cannot believe that we are having this conversation here.
Further discussion. Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we've discussed this, and like we've heard, this is our second time around on this. Mr. Chairman, I call the question.
Question has been called. Those in favor of ending debate and voting on the bill, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Very good. All right. We are now voting on the bill. Those in favor are passing out the bill. We've passed the amendment as amended. So I would entertain, actually, we're calling the question. So those in favor of passing out House Bill 2427 as amended? Oh, we don't have a motion. I need a motion. I apologize. All right. Hill with the motion, seconded by Riley. My apologies. It's my first day. It's not funny. Those in favor of passing out House Bill 2427 favorably as amended, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. The opinion of the chair is the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. Bill passes. Who would like their vote recorded on that? All the noes? Anybody else want their vote recorded? Okay. Yes votes, raise their hand. Very good. Yes. Very good. All right, y'all got a copy of the minutes. We do need to approve the minutes before we go. My apologies for skipping that. Sir? So moved by Representative Ruiz, seconded by Representative Murphy. Those in favor of approving the minutes for March 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 13th, 14th, and 15th, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? None. Motion carries. Representative Hill.
I can get a microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of you may have recalled not too terrible long ago, and I had a cell phone that went off. And my granddaughter brought me candy to pass out. So before you leave, grab a handful of candy if you want to.
Well, and I want to thank Representative Jacobs also for filling in today. And there's two people I forgot yesterday to thank, and that was, first of all, my vice chair, Representative Susan Estes, who's amazing and been a huge help for me. So I certainly want to thank her. And then Representative Stogsdill. This is, I think, his 33rd year is ranking on the Education Committee.
42nd.
My bad. But not only is he a civil guy, but he's also great, very wise, and very good to have conversations with, and I've enjoyed my time with him. And we still need to meet at that sushi joint over there in Prairie Village and have lunch. So with that, committee, good work this year. We are done for the year, and I appreciate all of you. And with that, we're adjourned.